We are here today with Linda Ugelow. She's a speaking confidence and vocal coach, podcast host, and author of the book Delight in the Limelight: Overcome Your Fear of Being Seen and Realize Your Dreams. Formerly stricken with public speaking herself, she now helps entrepreneurs, business professionals, and leaders transform their experience from speaking from dread to delight, whether online or on stage, in the media, or the meeting room. Linda, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so glad to be here, Iain.
Linda, before we dive into the activity we're going to do today, which we're going to keep the audience in suspense about for a few more minutes, can you tell us, how is it that you became a speaking confidence and vocal coach and all your other accolades?
I really wanted to be able to make some kind of an impact, and I had no idea what that was going to be. And I started off as taking a coaching program and then needed to get the word out there that, hey, here I am, ready to help you. And in the process, I stumbled across the tool called Periscope back in 2015, which was live streaming. It was the first live streaming app. And I realized as I was doing live streams day after day that I was terrified and expected at the same time that after some weeks I would feel comfortable. But that day never came. And after 10 weeks, I realized I was managing my fear, but I didn't want to manage my fear. I wanted to just get rid of it. And with my background in expressive arts therapy and psychology and self-development, I created inadvertently a way for myself to get over the fear. And when I looked around, I noticed that there was nobody else doing it the way I did it for myself, which is probably why I never got over it, because I couldn't find anyone doing exactly what I needed. And then it just blew up from there. It's like people said, oh, how did you get over your fear? And I started to help them, which led to my book, Delight in the Limelight, and my coaching and programs now.
Let's say that I'm someone with some speech experience. Perhaps I competed in high school or college, but I'm in an entirely different career. I'm not satisfied with that career, and I want to start professionally coaching. What's one thing it maybe took you a little longer to realize that now looking back, you wish you knew at the start?
The people I'm coaching are going to be guiding me and leading me to expand my own conceptions and precepts, and that I should be waiting and expecting and keeping track of those things.
What's an example of that you experienced with one of your mentees?
Yes. I had a coaching client who was a COO of a tech startup. So my precept is that when we have a fear of speaking, there's always a reason for it. The reasons I had in my mind were traumas from the past and messages that we received, the conditioning that we had. And when I sat down with him to review the relationships he had with his family and school, we couldn't really uncover any big traumas. He had a wonderfully supportive but not too pushy family. He did well in school. He had lots of friends. He didn't feel like people were jealous of him, or there was nothing that we could really unearth until he mentioned to me that he was valedictorian of his class. And I said, oh, does that mean that you feel really good about not making any mistakes? He said, oh, yeah, because in school, we're led to believe that mistakes are bad. And of course, we get penalized for every mistake we made and graded the highest for making none. And then I said, what do you say to yourself before or during or after you speak? And it sounded a little bit like, you're not a good speaker. Look at your partner, so much better than you. You're dull and boring. Oh, you made a mistake. You messed up. People are going to think badly of you. Now you're going to lose your reputation. People are going to see you're nervous. It just kind of spiraled from there. And all of a sudden I realized it's not just the wounds we get, but it's also the praise we get, because he was conflating his sense of self-worth and goodness and being good enough with being perfect. And of course, most of the speaking we do is somewhat spontaneous. We're not always memorizing a talk. Like for competition, we're thinking on our feet. So for him to judge himself at the same level that you would a competition every single time he presented to, even informally, was really setting himself up for feeling bad about himself. So he had an inner critic that was standing there waiting to berate him for every perceived imperfection. And for him, imperfection meant like a 96. For most of us, a 96, great job. But for him, that was failure.
Following you down these passive investigation, what you just said reminded me of this great book called How to Raise an Adult. And it talks about things not to say to your kids. Some of these things I think are relatively well known. For example, if you have the choice of saying, you worked really hard, that's great, versus you're very talented or you're naturally good at this, you should opt for praising their resilience and their decisions as opposed to something that might be innate. Similarly, are there any things that you've learned as a coach that some people might think it's okay to say to your students, but you try to avoid saying to them?
Yes, I really dislike quote unquote constructive feedback. The feedback sandwich of like saying something nice and then saying something that they did wrong and then saying something nice again. I believe more in the improv model of yes and. So I always try to take what they're doing and say, okay, now let's add this. Now let's focus on this. Because when I'm working with people who are very sensitive to criticism, they have been criticized, they already criticize themselves. We need to create a safe space. And so I am dedicated to creating an environment where people feel like it's okay to take risks, fine to be messy, ugly, dirty, sucky, and that there's no shame and there's no blame there. So I don't allow anyone to give constructive feedback to anyone else in the group or even to make suggestions unless asked for. But I do reserve myself the position to build upon what people are doing in a way that, because I want people to know how great they already are. And I don't want to activate that sense of anxiety in them. I want them to build from their strengths.
Is there any story you can give me about somebody who came in, perhaps their perception of their own value was buried under layers of trauma or of self-doubt or anxiety? And can you give us the before and after story of this person?
Almost every person who comes through my door has a story. I'll speak to you of somebody who was very high up in the aviation field, a female, male dominated industry. Father was a pilot, something she always wanted to do. People always looked at her as just a female. All the cultural things of, oh, a woman in the pilot seat, do I feel safe? And all of these senses of not being good enough and that her voice isn't heard. And she became a leader for in the industry where she had to, both last year and this year, speak to all the industry leaders, all the heads of the airlines, FAA, and she was one of two females in a large room of these leaders. And she got to a place where she owned that space. As soon as she got to the microphone, she loved the sound of her voice. Confidence is almost too broad a word, but that she allowed her voice to be full and resonant and have gravitas, and she believed in the mission that she was presenting to them. She was excited. And people came up to her afterwards and said, who are you? You have totally changed. You just like own the room, you own the space. And she got so much buy-in for her perspective that people wanted to change the training for the people coming into the industry.
There are some competitive speakers that I work with. They're UCLA's trial advocacy students, and some of them don't have a theater background. So they might have difficulty speaking to the back of the room or embracing vocal resonance. Some of my fellow coaches say they should just sing. They should do karaoke. They should understand proper breath control, and we'll take them down drills in that direction. What are drills that you do to help people embrace the resonance of their voice and move away from what so many experience, which is this feeling of cringe when you hear yourself recorded?
I work with people for 8 or 10 weeks, like in my group of Love and Transform the Sound of Your Voice. But some of the things I'll share with you. One is that we speak with our whole body at its best. And in order to carry your voice to the back of the room, you need a lot of energy and breath and efforts. Well, right now I'm speaking into a microphone, so it's pretty easy. I can even get really soft and it's fine. But when you are wanting to take up space, you need to engage well, even when you speak softly, you need to engage your abdominal muscles, the intercostal muscles. And so I love to invite people to use their whole bodies as they are starting to love and expand the sound of their voice. And we do a lot of call and response. We play with different tonalities. A lot of people use a lot of air in their sound. And if you speak with a lot of air comes out. There's no way you can make that air sound much louder without going into using more resonance and making it more twangy, almost like a troll under the bridge. That's very helpful to be able to find that type of resonance that cuts through the airspace. So we play with tonalities, we play with the movement of the body. Another hitching point is the people who speak down in what is called either fry or gravel. Like if you're down here, it's kind of like a constricted voice and has some of this sound. That is also going to impede you from adding volume. And so I help people get out of that sound into the round singing. I love that you said singing. We sing our vowels. All of our vowels should have that ring of singing. Because if you're going to be speaking, every word deserves to be heard. And every vowel needs to ring out. That way, everyone can hear what you are saying very clearly. And also, you are giving it the respect and the emphasis and the space that you want it to be understood by.
Well, with all that in mind, let's help our viewers, our listeners, start to understand how we take all this expertise that you have in coaching and then use it to create a competitive speech. I took a little while thinking about what sort of speech should we make together on the spot. And I realized that the best fit is something that we discussed all the way back in the 6th episode of this podcast, which is the professional spontaneous speaking category. To give the listeners some context, have you ever done any speaking competition outside of coaching?
The only thing that comes close is a storytelling slam that I went to, which I did not know was going to be a competition until I won. And I even went into the space, just to check out. Oh, someone had invited me to the storytelling slam. And when I walked in, she said, "Are you going to put your name in the hat?" And I said, "No, I'm just going to check it out." There was a theme to it. I think it was called Say a Little Prayer. And nothing came to me because I'm not the praying type. And yet, as I sat there, first of all, the bar was really low. And my feeling was, I could do this. And then all of a sudden, a story came to my head that actually fit the theme. And I decided, okay, I'm going to do this. And I got up, I put my name in the hat, I did it. And then at the end of it, it turned out it had been a competition. I did win, and I went on to the semifinals, won that, and went on to the finals, and did not win the finals. So that's the extent of my competition.
Let's talk about the finals for a moment, because I think that a lot of people, and I think you referenced this with one of your prior students, are very afraid of trying if there isn't a guarantee of success. And you'll see a lot of folks who might be engineers where the answer is pretty clear. The inputs and the outputs are determined for them. And something that's softer, like, will the audience like me, is frightening, even though as a non-engineer, I think I'd be very scared of messing something up when it's got to be perfectly so or else the bridge collapses. So as somebody with your background, what was the experience being in that final round without the guarantee of victory?
Well, first of all, I mean, the idea that, will they like me, I think is a really dangerous question because nobody is liked by every single person. And so I go in always with the expectation that some people are going to enjoy it and resonate, some people medium, and some people maybe not at all. And that's perfectly fine. Because if I think about, do I like everything equally? Of course not. So we have to make that an okay thing and expect it and honor it. So I go in without expectation of how people will like it. I go in with my own sense of what I want to accomplish. How do I want to feel when I'm up there? What would I like to try out? in with more of a curiosity and experimental framework. At the same time, and also maybe improving from where I was before. So I'm always trying to add a new layer. And I also know, because of what I said earlier about being afraid of making mistakes, I try to take a contrary approach of doing experiments. And some experiments are going to work, and some experiments are going to be less. They will work less, but they'll give you information. I try not to make it about my self-worth. It's not at all about my self-worth. It's more about, this is a cool experience. Let's see what it's like.
Let's see what professional spontaneous speaking is like. Some of the listeners who might not be familiar with the category, this is very similar to high school and collegiate impromptu speaking. That means contestants here are given 2 minutes to think after being given a topic, and then 5 minutes to speak on that topic. And what we're going to do together is extend the preparation time by a little so we can see what is the way you're organizing your thoughts as you deal with these. We're going to give quotations on this, and I'll help talk through what I think would be the most viable way of addressing these quotations to treat this like a Mad Lib speech that we're putting together. So I've got a list of 100 quotations in front of me. I'd like to get 3 numbers from you, 1 to 100.
Okay, 25, 73, and 49.
Okay. 25 is the quotation, "You can never cross the ocean until you have the courage to lose sight of the shore." You also said 73. 73 is Oprah Winfrey. "You become what you believe." And the last one, 49, is a Helen Keller quotation. "When one door of happiness closes, another opens. But often, we look so long at the closed door that we do not see the one that is opened for us." In this category, the first thing that somebody would do is cross out the quotations that they don't feel any attachment to. So, which ones are we getting rid of? Which one are we going with?
That feels very similar to the last one. They're both very similar. So I would cross maybe that first one off and just keep the other 2.
Okay, so between the longer one from Helen Keller and the shorter one from Oprah Winfrey, which one do you like more?
The last one was about looking back, that you can't move forward if you're always looking back. And the Oprah is,
"You become what you believe."
I like the last one the best.
Okay, I'll put that in our chat. And now we've got this quotation. What we're going to do is now remember an acronym. I call it EPIC. Evolve, persist, illuminate, or connect. I argue that in this category, almost every interpretation of any topic you get will be attached to one of those 4 major themes. Evolve stories are about innovation. Persist stories are about determination and not giving up. Illuminate stories are about teaching something that's new. And then connect stories are about our shared humanity. When you look at this quote, which of the 4 do you think it most closely adheres to?
It would either be illuminate or the connect. Connect because I feel like we can all relate to the things that I talk about. Illuminate because it's going to bring a new perspective on what the fear of speaking is all about. What do you suggest?
I think for when one door of happiness closes, another opens, but often we look so long at the closed door that we do not see the one that has been opened for us. That is illuminate to me more than it is connect, because the quote doesn't directly suggest something about our relationships with each other. We can extrapolate that it's about our relationships with each other, but I think this is really about what is the new thing that we have to learn, the new door that has been opened. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. And what I like about that quote is that there are different ways of me to look at that. Like, I feel like one of the doors is actually that back door, that we need to open up a different door to the past. We need to create a new relationship to the past. At the same time, it's almost like I have an image of a monkey bars, like the ones that you go hand over hand and you move forward. Like, we need to keep releasing the past to move forward. But we only do that when we do that investigation. The door is not just forward, it's also back. Yeah, I think I like that first one that I said the best. The door is not just leaving behind the past, but a new door into the past. Yes, I like that.
Okay, so we've got the topic and we have your interpretation. The next step is, what are the three main body paragraphs going to look like? And I'll give you a couple options. One option is what we might call a three-lesson structure. From the universal truth that you believe the quotation is espousing, there are three sub-lessons that we can learn. The second is a set structure that deconstructs a problem. We call it the cause-harm-solution structure. I'll use one of the other quotations that you didn't select to show how this might work. One of the quotations we didn't select is, "You become what you believe." If I interpret that to mean that we have the power to shape our reality, we have a tremendous amount of autonomy to make the world around us molded to our will, I then say, but there's a problem. Not enough of us believe in our ability to shape things. So using the cause-harm-solution structure, I would say, first, let's talk about why that's the case, why we lack this self-confidence. Second, the harms of living in a world where we don't think that we can shape things. And then finally, a mindset shift to help solve this issue. So the first substructure you could use is three lessons from the quotation. The second is a cause-harm solution. And the third, and often the easiest for people to take on, is here are three stories that illustrate what I'm talking about. The stories could be personal, they could come from your clients, they could come from media, they could come from history, they could come from anywhere. But they should be stories you feel passionately about. So what do you think is best for you?
Cause, harm, solution.
So now let's talk that through. Going back to your interpretation of the quotation, the Helen Keller one, in one sentence, what would you say it is?
I think that when we look back, we see a particular view through that door, and we need to open up a different door to the past in order for it to heal. It's not something that's clinging to us. And it's through that new back door that we can move forward into our future self.
Okay, so now we go into the cause, the reason that too often we are unable to heal, that we're unable to look in a constructive way through that door. What would you say that is? Why do we fail to do this?
First of all, I think that we are often told to feel the fear and do it anyway, that we're told to ignore or push through the anxiety that we feel when we speak, or to fake it till we make it. So what happens is that those things in the past that are triggering our anxiety response are not being addressed. So we may be ignoring them, but they're not ignoring us.
Now let's move on to the harm. Why is this bad? Why is it something we have to address?
Because when you are feeling nervous when you speak, it takes up a lot of your mental bandwidth and emotional energy. And our minds can only handle paying attention to so many things at a time. So if you are trying to be thinking of what you're supposed to say, wanting to think about your delivery or connecting with the audience, but you're also at the same time, your heart's racing, your mouth is dry, your hands are shaking, that's going to be a huge distraction, let alone you're not able to express yourself freely, let alone you're not having a good time. So I think it's incumbent upon us that if we want to feel great in our speaking, that we need to take care of being in the present moment. And being in the present moment means that we allow the past to fall away. We allow the past to fall away by addressing it and resolving whatever didn't get to be resolved the first time around.
That takes us to the solution. You say that we should address and resolve the issue of repressing the important details of our past.
Yep.
How do we do that?
We do it first by bringing them out into the light. It's kind of like a closet. If you're cleaning out a closet, you take the stuff out of the closet and you look at what you got. So it's the same thing with what I call the psychic closet. We take stuff out. What are your relationships like with your family, the members? What was significant? Who did you try to please and could never please? Who gave you support that you always felt comfortable being around? And the same thing in school. Like, where did you feel most comfortable and yourselves? Where did you feel encouraged and advocated for? Where did you feel bullied, ridiculed, dismissed, ignored, embarrassed? And so once we bring those things out to the light, then we need to address them in a way that we wish they could have been addressed at the time they happened.
We've got a cause, we've got a harm, and a solution. Now we need to have an intro and an outro. The introduction is generally a story, either a personal story or something from media, something that you've heard about, that you think frames the topic effectively. We're going to talk about causes, harms, and solutions, about addressing the mindset that you think either is inherent within the topic or not enough people adopt. So what do you think is a good story that helps frame this issue?
Well, one possibility would have been my Periscope story, that here I was trying to do it every day. When I complained to my video mentor that it was scary, she said, you'll get over it, Linda. Just give yourself 10 weeks. And I thought, 10 weeks? Daily videos for 10 weeks? And then I thought, okay, here I go. And all these things that I did to manage it, like deep breathing, power poses, affirmations, meditation, assuming, of course, I'm going to feel comfortable because everyone said with experience comes confidence. And after 10 weeks, realizing my heart is still pounding, my mouth, I'm still hyperventilating. I feel like I'm becoming disembodied and feeling that sense of frustration. Like, what is wrong with me?
I'm thinking about how we're framing this. You open up with telling your story. For many years now, you've been a coach, but for at least some time during your coaching experience, you were getting advice that was just power through it. Power through, make these videos, and it's going to work itself out. And it didn't work itself out. Not until you took the meaningful step of looking to the past, seeing what was holding you back, addressing it, and then you could move on. Naturally bridges to Helen Keller's quotation. Now let's go back to the causes. I think that it's totally fine to be abstract on this first point, because your job here with the audience is just to get them to figure out, what am I generally talking about? You don't have to tell a narrative here. But it's helpful if you have some kind of official label for the cause. For example, a lot of people might use a sociological theory. Like they wouldn't just say, we don't know when to give up. They would say, we call this the sunk cost fallacy. Going back to the cause that you talked about before, do you think there's a particular label that could add credibility to it?
Well, in my framework, I talk about reveal and heal, but I also ask the audience, when did you decide it was safer to hide?
I think that functions as a good one-liner within the cause or even within the solution. But the reveal to heal also comes to me like it's a solution point as opposed to a cause point. So is there a label that you would give as to the reason that we fail to do this?
I think it is our cultural belief that there must be something wrong with us, and we don't want to face this idea of vulnerability. Maybe you can help me talk this through a little bit. For instance, let's say you are the CEO of a company. Let's say you are a manager. You have high expertise, and you're embarrassed that at your level that you're having to deal with the fear of speaking and that you don't want people to even know about it. I think that somehow reflects upon how people look at stuff, look at past stuff, look at the stuff of our lives that is painful. I know that when I grew up, only people who are really messed up went to therapy. Now everybody goes to therapy. It's not a big deal. But I think on a cultural level, we need to look at it as normal. It's normal to have stuff. I think it's also that people don't realize the connection. I think it's simply that they don't see it talked about anywhere. What if they look up getting over the fear of speaking? No one says, hey, you got to go back. I need to work on my SEO, obviously, if I'm not on the front page to let the people know that. But I think people just have never connected the dots. I think that maybe even more.
So this is just a lack of cultural exposure to the concept?
I think so.
I don't have off the top of my head the appropriate name for it. Every time that I think about different cultural norms, I go back to Gert Hofstede. This guy researched cultural differences, and he looked at things like power distance, femininity, masculinity, openness to change, long-term orientation. And there might be something in Hofstede that we could look at later that details how this might be something that's more prevalent in, say, American culture versus Canadian versus Swiss versus Kenyan. So whether we go with the experiential avoidance or we go with some sort of cultural norm around vulnerability and sharing, there certainly are a lot of things we could put in that cause. Let's then go towards the harm. You've already articulated what the harm is. This one is less sort of a pie in the sky, abstract. Let's discuss the theory. This is an application. It shouldn't be a story about you because you already have your personal story in the introduction, but it can be a story about anybody else. It should be a specific narrative, though. Is there one that comes to mind?
One client was saying how she grew up in a Catholic environment, and everyone said, don't stand out, keep your head down, try to take up space. That's braggadocious. And so even though she is in a position where she is asked to be on stage a lot, she always feels like she shouldn't be there. Or there's something bad about her doing that she feels guilty for being on the stage.
She had this fear. What did she lose as a result of that prior to working with you?
She was avoiding taking opportunities. She was losing sleep. She was stressing out every time she had to be in the limelight. It made her ambivalent as she was up there, and that kind of like used up a lot of her emotional energy. She couldn't just be up there and enjoy herself and do her thing because there was part of her saying, you're being bad, you're taking up space.
Okay. For the intro now, we've got your personal story. The cause, it's either going to be experiential avoidance or the cultural norms that surround looking back in the past and confronting them. The harm is the story of this client who really struggled, was losing sleep because she wasn't able to confront her past and her trauma and start sharing. So now we get to the solution. Earlier, you've already articulated some really cool one-liners that I think can be used here. And let's use a narrative. And this time, let's avoid this being yourself or a speaking client. And the reason that we do this is because we want to make sure on a competitive basis that if they're partially into the speaking narratives you've been giving, you've already won the round because you're so clear on that. But let's say that they want to hear something else. At this point, you're still trying to get ranked on their ballot, assuming the judge is you and a bunch of other speakers. So what's something you can give us along the same theme? It's a solution, but it's not coming from the world of speaking.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a book written by Trisha Montalvo Tim. Trisha was somebody who grew up Latina, both parents from different countries. They started off in LA, but quickly felt like, oh, this isn't a great environment for her, our kids, because under-resourced. So they moved to the suburbs where the only Latina family. And her parents, they themselves had been discriminated against, told their kids, don't ever let people know your background. So it turned out she rose through the ranks of law and worked in litigation in very high-profile companies. Nobody ever knew she was Latina. She never spoke the names of her family. They didn't even know she had kids herself. She hid everything from view. And she got to a certain point where she felt like nobody knows the real me. I would have to look back into her book, and I also had her on my podcast, so I could even go back to that to look through it. But I remember her beginning to, I don't know what the pivot was, where she began to speak about being Latina and feeling invisible and feeling silenced and needing to show her real self, her true self. And just that way that she had healed, she became an inspiration for Latina people in companies across the US by beginning to speak about the importance of bringing your full self into the workplace and not hiding who you truly are.
Someone who you've spoken with, who inspires you, but this feels different enough from the other points. We've got the opening story. We've got your first point, the causes. We've got your second point, the harm. So you have your third point now, the solutions. On the outro, it's pretty straightforward. You recap your points briefly. You give a call to action, and then you tie it back to your introduction, end with some callback to how you began. And it could be about what you've learned in your time since expanding on your knowledge beyond that Periscope coach that you mentioned.
What happens on the other side when you release the past, when you shift the way you work inside your own head so that you're more of an advocate, an ally, as opposed to a judge or a demander, then you are free to explore what is it to be authentically you and explore how to build your skills and the opportunities that start to open up when you are free to kind of move forward across the ocean. Things that you never thought would ever come your way, that you would ever enjoy, become your norm, that you begin to delight in all your limelight moments.
Fantastic. That's a full, competitive, spontaneous speech. Now, we spent a little bit more time talking through it than you would if you were in a competition because you'd only have 2 minutes to prep there. But largely, people talking through these are the narratives that I know that fit into that framework I gave before, EPIC, the Evolve, Persist, Illuminate, Connect framework, means that if you get a quotation like this, if you ever compete in the future, you'll have some idea of what you could do with it. Now, the first time I gave a speech in this format, it was junior year of high school. I spoke for 30 seconds and then I gave up. And there's plenty of adults who start and they think they've got something to say, but they can't get past a minute, or they lose track of what they're saying and then it catches up with them. So what we're going to do now is give you 2 minutes to gather thoughts, and then we're going to take a crack at it, putting all this together, looking at the outline, and then trying to speak. For our listeners, 2 minutes just passed. And now we're going to hear this first professional spontaneous speech in this particular format. Please take it away, Linda.
So back in 2015, I had just become an online coach, and everyone was talking about this amazing new app that was going to change the online space forever. It was called Periscope, and the technology was live streaming. I was told that if you get on daily, you can build a following, and I would be an early adopter. And I thought, I'm so late to this world. Let me be an early adopter at something. So I got on that first day. My heart was pounding. I was hyperventilating, but I thought, I'm going to do this. I spoke for 5 minutes and I got off and I thought, phew, I hope it feels better next time. Next day, same thing happens. And all week long, I'm getting on feeling absolutely terrified. So I reached out to my mentor at the time, my video mentor, and said, are you scared too? And she said, Linda, everybody's scared and you'll get over it. Give it 10 weeks. I thought, 10 weeks? Okay, here we go. And I researched how to get over my fear of speaking. And people said, pretend your fear is excitement. I thought, well, that's cool, but how do you not know the difference between fear and excitement? And then they would say things like, don't think of yourself, think of your audience, which I totally agree with. But how do you think of them when all you're doing is hyperventilating into a bag? Or 3, do it anyway. And that's what I did. I felt the fear and #did it scared. So every day I tried something new, meditation, affirmations, deep breathing, power poses, you name it, I tried it, assuming, of course, I'm going to get over this. Week 5, week 10, finally, I'm going to get over this speaking hell. But you know what? My heart was still pounding. And I thought, what is wrong with me? Why isn't this working? Now, probably if you're afraid of speaking, you understand this too. Maybe you practice over and over and over. But when it comes down to actually present, you feel this anxiety. So the topic today is when one door of happiness closes, another opens. But often we look so long at the closed door that we don't see the one that has been opened for us. That was by Helen Keller. My interpretation of this is that we close the doors of our past and we never look back, thinking that the way forward is always in the forward tense. But in truth, what's going on is that we need to look at the past, opening up a new door and see new things in order to look forward. You see, the causes of the reasons why we are afraid to speak is that we have this idea that the past is the past and there's nothing more to be done about it. But that's wrong. The past contains lots of stuff that clings on to us, stuff that has never been resolved. Messages that we heard like, don't brag, don't stand out, don't take up too much space, don't be braggadocious. This is a harm when we had these things in the past that don't make sense, that don't serve us, and we don't address them. My client, Jan, was one of these people who had a history of people saying these very things to her. So whenever she was on stage, she felt, oh my God, I shouldn't really be doing this. I'm doing something naughty. there was never a sense of owning the stage, of feeling confident there because she always had this thing from the past pulling her back. So what do? We need to look at our past, fully embracing it, looking at whatever needs to be resolved, and addressing those things. I'm thinking of the author Tricia Montalvo Tim, who was a very highly successful litigator in many high-tech companies. However, she realized at some point that she was feeling like a fraud. Why? Because she realized she hid herself from her past because of fear of being accepted. Nobody knew she was Latina. No one knew she was a mama. And it wasn't until she decided she was going to own her past and let it be seen that she finally felt like she was who she was wherever she went. So this is what happens when you get to the other side of the fear of speaking, when you have cleared the stuff from the past, when you have made a sense of alignment with how you're thinking to yourself so that you are embracing and encouraging yourself rather than working against yourself. Opportunities open up for you. You feel who you are wherever you go without feeling the need to be someone else, to fake it till you make it, to be a fraud until some future day that you will be feeling free. You feel free that future day by looking in the past, by opening up that new door, by embracing and resolving the stuff you find there. And when you do, you will discover not just that you are present, not just that you aren't afraid of what other people think, but that you are indeed delighting in all your limelight moments.
There you go. That was a 5-minute, 58-second speech. It was your first speech in this format. What are your immediate post-speech reflections?
I should have shortened the first story. I need to find ways to condense that so that there is more space for these other elements.
The competitive coaching industry would call that time allocation. And I agree. We use the term minute splits because if there's 5 minutes and there's a 1-minute intro, 1-minute first point, etc., then that means that you try to wrap up as soon as possible after each point. But I'll compliment you, and of course your speaking confidence coaching experience shows, where you realize that there was too much time spent in the initial part of the speech. So you definitely accommodated the other points to make sure that you're able to get through everything the way you wanted to.
Right. And I was also aware that it was already past the 5-minute mark, but I felt like for the benefit of the speech itself, and because this is not a competition right here, that I wanted to go through the full piece to just see what it felt like.
Today we did quotations. In this format, you might get current events, you might get abstract nouns or concrete nouns. They might point to something in the room and say you should start speaking about that thing. They might ask open-ended questions like in table topics. What are your thoughts on the format?
I liked the format. I thought it was fun. It's similar to what I've done in the past in my keynotes, but it also has a somewhat different structure. And I feel like I want to sit with it and just think about how that could impact or opened up into a longer keynote from a 5-minute table talk and what I might put in there.
Fantastic. For the benefit of all the listeners, I encourage you to walk through a similar format. If you're somebody who's coached impromptu speaking before, then go to someone who hasn't done it, but they've got stories to share and see what they're willing to share with you. Because I feel like I'm enlightened about Linda and her experiences and her values just from this hour of conversation. And if you're somebody who hasn't done this before, I encourage you to do it. Follow in Linda's example. I think really confront if you feel that you are unwilling right now or this feels a little too scary for you. Maybe listen to this spontaneous speech that you just heard and ask why. What can I deal with so that I can get there? Linda, thank you so much for the time that you've taken to enlighten all of our listeners. Where can they find you?
Well, my name is Linda Ugelow, Ugelow. And if you want to download a free speaking preparation checklist where it's not about preparing what you're going to say, but preparing how to be in the space, you can get that at lindaugelow.com/rituals. And otherwise, with my name, you'll find me across social media.
Thank you so much, Linda. And thanks to everybody for tuning in to this episode of the Offend Talk Public Speaking Podcast.